Welcome back to another episode of The Right Ingredients. For those joining us for the first time, this podcast is where we discuss the people, leadership, and hiring challenges shaping the global specialty ingredients industry. Across food ingredients, flavours, fragrances, personal care, and chemical specialties, companies are facing a growing challenge that almost every leadership team I speak with raises sooner or later, and that's finding the right candidate. Not just filling vacancies, but finding experienced technical specialists, strong commercial leaders, and future leadership talent. The reality is that attracting, developing, and retaining talent has become significantly more difficult over the past decade. So today, we're going to explore that topic in a bit more detail. Joining me today is Claire Roth. Claire has most recently been at Brenntag Specialties as Vice President of HR and has held senior HR leadership roles across companies such as ADM and Devro. She has spent her career working inside large global organizations and partnering directly with leadership teams on talent strategy, workforce transformation, and leadership development. Claire, welcome to The Right Ingredients.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Not at all. So let's jump straight in. Claire, to start us off, you've worked across several large global companies within the food, ingredients, and chemical sectors. From your perspective, is the industry genuinely facing a talent shortage, or are companies simply struggling to adapt their hiring strategies to the market?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's true to say that we are facing a genuine talent shortage, particularly when it comes to very specialist niche positions, R&D, very technical positions. But I think at the same time, there's a lot more that organizations can do to attract talent to join the industry, to retain talent that's already in the industry and within the organization. So I'd say it's a bit of both.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with that. I think it's good that you highlighted the technical aspect quite early, because that's something that I wanted to go into, because I hear that frequently from clients that it is growingly difficult to hire technical specialists. It's normally where I'm brought in to support those different recruitment hires from across flavorists, application technologists, regulatory R&D leaders. Give me a little bit more information as to why you think it's maybe becoming increasingly difficult for those companies to attract and retain specifically strong technical talent.
Yeah. I think the pipeline's small, right? I think that it's already an industry that attracts STEM, and we've got to do a lot more to make sure that our kids are appreciating STEM as a future potential career opportunity. So I think it starts young. I think it starts very early in the pipeline. And then these technical specialists that we're wanting to recruit and hire, well, they take a really long time to train and educate. And then we're looking for them to have, 5, 10, 15 years experience. So the pipeline gets narrower and narrower and narrower. But on top of that, some organizations may be natural inclination to say, want, X number of years experience. I want this very specific education. But on top of that, they must have worked for a direct competitor in a very similar role. And then automatically we are limiting ourselves to the tiniest of talent pools. And I'm wondering if that's the potential to maybe open that up from an organization's point of view.
Do you think that's one of the biggest mistakes organizations make when trying to attract technical specialists, having what's ideal and what's a must in terms of the job requirements?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's a natural part of the process that when we in organizations are recruiting that we go through, right? We have our wish list of these, especially the hiring manager, they want the absolute best talent on their team. They've got this opportunity to bring someone into their team. Of course, their wish list of must-haves is this long. And then it's HR's responsibility to be in the middle and kind of say, okay, I understand what's on the market. I understand what our external talent partners or our internal talent acquisition partners are saying. And how do we meet that middle ground of saying, well, you must have this, but can we flex here? And let's think about the capabilities and the skills that we're needing of that role now and in the future. Where can we flex? Where can we be creative? And where can we say, yeah, is it 10 years experience or is it 5 because we're willing to invest in that person to grow? Is it working for a direct competitor, or is it someone who's worked in an adjacent industry, but they have these experiences and capabilities and skills that we know we can benefit from as a company?
Out of curiosity, from your career spanning the different global multinationals that you have worked within, how often are you brought a job description from a direct line manager, from a hiring manager, that you think this is going to need some work, otherwise we're limiting the talent pool too much?
Yeah, I think it's really common. I think that happens very frequently. We typically start from can be quite a dry job description that outlines, 10 or so things. And it's really our job to then bring that to life, to challenge where can we be flexible, what's really a must have, and then where can we make that a more interesting job proposition that adds in, what is the purpose of the role? What is that person really going to be coming in to do to make a difference? And I think working those things out can lead us to what is it we're really looking for ultimately in the market.
For sure. Historically, this industry has relied quite heavily on global mobility. Many technical experts, especially, relocate internationally at different stages of their career. It expands knowledge, expands culture, a variety of different things that can be beneficial. However, over the past few years, I've noticed many candidates becoming far less open to relocation. So, Claire, from your perspective, how are you seeing global mobility evolve in large multinational organizations?
Yeah, I've really seen that evolution. I've been part of that evolution as well. Earlier in my career, I was an expat myself a couple of times, and I was also responsibility for facilitating those relocations. And the culture felt like, it was much more accepted, much more needed and required. If you want a senior global career, then you must have lived internationally. I feel like that's changed from both the candidate side, the employee side, and from the company perspective. In the past 10, 20 years, technology has changed so much, but I don't think there's quite that necessity in every case to have someone on the ground from the headquarters on the ground in that other location, for example. We're bridging those gaps with teams, with better travel, etc. But I think there's also the fact that life has changed post-COVID. For example, I think we can all relate potentially to the fact that our priorities, even as extremely career-minded individuals, our priorities are no longer purely career. There's family, there's caring responsibilities, there's dual careers in most couples now, and that's a lot for an individual to think about when they're thinking about a potential global mobility opportunity. And I think the final point is that these opportunities are really expensive. It costs a company so much to send a senior executive abroad, particularly when they have a family. And that's an investment that organizations are looking very, very closely at nowadays.
For sure. I mean, especially when you look into expatriate contracts and things like that, where if you're being sent to Singapore, Dubai, somewhere like that, which will include housing, relocation assistance, it's a huge investment. But when it is needed, when it is a 100% requirement from both the business and the person who's relocating, from a HR leadership perspective, what do you think companies can do better to support relocation and make these moves seem more attractive to the industry, or to the company, should I say?
Yeah. I was listening to your podcast with Willie.
Yes,
Who
Willie
spoke
from
about
IFF.
this, and he said some really interesting things, specifically about how HR and the policies and the companies that we choose to work with, but also the attitude that HR people could and should have, and how that makes a difference to the employee's perspective and their experience. So I think that from the HR point of view, I think that makes a huge difference. When the HR person has been on an assignment themselves, I think that completely changes their mindset. But having that empathy for the employee and the experience that they're about to go through, that they're going through, and the repatriation part of their experience as well is hugely important. But from the company perspective, I think it's about making sure that these are assignments that matter, that are meaningful, that make sense, that support the employee and support their trailing family. Because as you and Willie said in that episode, if the employee isn't happy in their personal life, that doesn't translate well into their professional life.
Yeah, I think there's some good advice, and to follow up on the last podcast as well. So yeah, I'm glad that you found there's some good insights there from both the candidate's perspective and from your perspective, the HR leadership style of things. Do you think, this is sort of a side question, do you think the industry needs to rethink the expectation that certain roles must be tied to a specific location? And what I mean by that is, of course, if you're having an R&D leader that needs to be in the lab, it needs to be location based. When you have somebody that is a commercial leader, there's an argument, well, I want them on the ground with the commercial team in that region. Now, if they're based on the other side of the world, that's of course not going to work just due to time zone differences. Simple as that. But if they are, for example, the commercial team is based in Germany, this person is based in Austria rather than Germany. So with that in mind, do you think that certain companies need to rethink the expectations that certain roles need to be tied to specific locations? Or do you think you can look at it more on a continental basis?
I have very personal opinions about this, but I'm also very sympathetic to the culture of the organization and what they're trying to achieve. It would be very easy for me to sit here from a personal perspective. I think that, especially in more senior roles, there needs to be that absolute flexibility to find the best talent. The best talent doesn't always sit in the town, in the region that your facility happens to sit in. That's very clear to everyone. At the same time, we can recognize pre-COVID, during COVID, and now there's been a complete transformation in how we view this topic. And I think that we're learning and understanding that there is so much value to having that face-to-face interaction. So 100% completely remote role where that commercial leader never sees the team in Germany, I think we can all agree that that just isn't acceptable. Is there something in between with some clever hybrid structures that would support that? Yes. I think it depends on the maturity of the team. I think it depends on the maturity of the organization and the culture that they're trying to drive. Bringing every single person back to the office for the sake of filling an office, that's one extreme. And I don't think that serves the talent shortage issue that we talked about. So I think it's about finding that sweet spot that suits the organization.
For sure. And I think there's also when companies say to me, the role's going to require relocation, or if we're going to look for somebody elsewhere, they're going to have to relocate. Now, that word relocation, it always meant to me, the person and their family are going to need to relocate. I approached a candidate a couple of weeks ago and said, this role would require you to relocate. And he said, me relocate or my family? And I asked him to what he meant by that. And he said, well, I'm happy to be based on site 5 days a week. That's not a problem for me, but I don't want to relocate my family. I'm happy to travel back on a Friday afternoon. I mean, this role was within Europe. We're not talking intercontinentally here, but that sort of made me think of it differently to the client, because the client is expecting, we want somebody living here. Now, do you want somebody living there or do you want somebody working there? Because I think that's a key difference there. People are seemingly, or some people are more open to the extensive travel, flying in on a Monday morning, flying home on a Friday afternoon, than they would be uprooting their entire lives with their families, schools, house, everything like that, and putting themselves in a new location. So I think that's definitely a different way that some businesses need to review. What type of relocation are you expecting here? Do you want somebody to fully integrate into the business by living there? Or do you want somebody that is happy to fly in and out? I think that's a crucial element as well.
I completely agree. I've seen examples of that. I think it really depends on your family structure at home. And some of those scenarios can work for you at different times of your life.
Definitely.
But we have to be creative. We cannot expect to get the best of both worlds, the best talent, and have this rigid mindset of they have to permanently relocate with their family here. I think there's so much that people are willing and able to do now. Is it Monday to Friday? Is it 3 days a week for someone moving within the country? Is it 3 weeks on, 1 week off? We can be really creative.
For sure. Another challenge I see quite often when working with leadership teams is succession planning. Many companies realize that they have a succession issue only when key leaders resign or retires. From your experience inside global organizations, how do companies actually plan for leadership succession?
I think nowadays most global organizations have very clear processes around talent management, succession planning. This is all risk management, right?
Yeah.
So we do a lot of work around having the conversations of what does your structure look like today? Who's in these roles? Which are the most critical roles? What's that pipeline of talent that could succeed those roles now, 3 years' time, 5 years' time? I think that's mostly there, especially in global large organizations. Where I see the gap is who owns that work. Because yes, that's an HR process, and HR is integral to leading and guiding that process. But I've seen a lot of that work where there's lip service to, fill the boxes. Yeah, that person can do it. And what about this person? Put their name in the box. But when it really comes to fitting that role, are we really genuinely putting that person in the role? No, We're not. So that's where the gap comes. And I think the second point is the ownership of that work needs to be the business. Because yes, HR can run the process, HR can challenge, HR can guide and support. But what really is that magic sauce is when the business leader owns that plan, because the plan is only as good as the plan, right? The magic and the value adding work comes from then being dedicated to the development of that handful of employees who you see as the future succession. And that's where if the leaders don't own that, so what? What difference are we making by doing all these succession planning activities?
For sure. How early do you think companies should start identifying and developing future leaders?
I mean, it's day one. It's day one. I think if managers own this, they know who on their team are the future leaders. You can tell. Maybe that changes over time because human beings change, but you can and you should, as a leader, as a manager, know the one or two or whatever number that is in your team of those that you're betting on for being the future leaders of the organization.
And in your view, what separates companies that build strong internal pipelines from those that constantly rely on external hiring?
I think the difference is the company's dedication to development, to talent management and development. If you as a company say, we just don't want to put our time, effort and dollars into developing internal talent, that's a decision. There's nothing wrong with that. It's that you're just going to see a lot of turnover. You're going to see a lot of talent coming in from the outside. You're going to see a lot of knowledge leakage. I think the organizations that strike that balance, because I don't think you want one or the other, right? I think you can have amazing internal talent, development, succession, that pipeline growing from within, and you can supplement it with external thinking, with talent from different industries, with diversity of thought, with people who come in that first 1 or 2 years with fresh eyes and say, why are we doing this? What works well in other industries or other companies is that. So that perfect balance of the both, I think is the best place to be.
For sure. I think from my perspective, I think there's two different types of succession planning. I think you need internal succession planning in terms of leadership pipelines. Who are the key figures within the business at the moment that could move into senior leadership positions? But I also think what is equally important is external succession planning. Right. If this person left tomorrow, who within the market could we pick up the phone and have a conversation with right away? Now, these could be people that you've never even reached out to. You don't know that they are interested in said position, said company, but they're on the company's radar as somebody that's maybe working for a direct competitor or somebody that's working in an adjacent field. They could also be candidates that have speculatively shown interest in your business that you could say, yes, your profile looks very good, but we just don't have anything right now. But they're in that box that should candidate hand in their resignation, or should an employee hand in their resignation, should they resign, whatever it may be, then at that point, you can then open that box and you have both internal people that maybe are ready for that step up and external people that you can pick up the phone and have those conversations with right away. I think having both of those elements, you're always in a good position to not have downtime of some companies will have 6 to 12 months before they have somebody again in situ, which can be really, really negative to the business, to customers, to sales and things like this.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think that's the advantage of having a diverse team, which is those internal candidates who know, those long-serving internal employees who know the organization back to front, inside out. But every time you bring someone new into the organization, they bring with them their network and they know a lot of people outside. And I think, of course, long-standing internal candidates, internal employees, their network is in such a small industry like specialty and ingredients. We know the market really well. So yeah, that's definitely a huge advantage, a huge talent advantage to think of it from the external perspective as well and planning for that.
Yeah, a lot of projects I have done in the past have been benchmarking external talent against internal talent. So a company will approach me and say, we've now need to hire this position. We have 3 individuals internally that we think are ready for the step, but we want to benchmark them against external talent. If an external talent is available and interested, we will bring them into the process, but we want to see what we can get in the market. Are there suitable individuals? So it won't involve actually me speaking to candidates about company role and things like that, but it will involve me mapping the market. Who is available? Who is suitable for said position? And how do they rank against the internal options? And I think having that benchmark is also important, because sometimes if you are starting a recruitment process and you're only looking internal talent, sometimes it will be more of a, this is the best of the bunch. And that's not the best way to look at it. You need to look at it as, right, who's going to be the best person to take on this position? Some more junior candidates that are taking that step up, they might not be ready yet. They might need another year or two. Sometimes that can be pushed rather than hiring externally, because hiring externally is, of course, going to be a little bit more expensive. You're probably going to have to pay a higher premium on the salary that you originally had. You're bringing somebody into the business. That takes time to really integrate them. If you're working with an executive search company, there's probably going to be a fee there. So hiring externally is going to be more expensive. So sometimes there's a push for the internal talent, but sometimes it's about having that balance of what's the right person versus internal, external.
Yeah. And these roles don't come around very often, right? So
no, of course.
There's a big weight and responsibility on the organization to make that right decision. And there's, as you say, a balance to make sure that we're putting the right person in the role.
Something I also hear from candidates quite frequently is that many companies talk about development, but struggle to execute it properly. People are promised growth opportunities, but in reality, those opportunities often never materialize, especially in the timeframes that people expect. So, for example, I speak to people that say, listen, I've hit my ceiling because the only room for me to grow is into my director's role, and he's not leaving anytime soon. He'll be retiring in the next 10 to 15 years. And by then, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be in this role for 10 to 15 years, which is understandable. So why do you think talent development programs fail in so many organizations?
It's a complex one. I don't know that they fail. I think that they can't always serve everyone, right?
Of course.
I think that I think a lot of organizations, and I've worked in organizations that do an outstanding job of developing talent at the very beginning of that talent pipeline. So graduate programs, specifically in commercial and technical specialist roles. I think a lot of organizations make a lot of effort there. And then I think there's a lot of focus, and quite rightly so, on then developing the top X% of the organization, those identified, targeted talent, because you can't spread your talent development dollars equally across every employee. It won't make that noticeable difference. So it doesn't always touch everyone, but I think talent development doesn't always have to come in the form of a program. And the biggest learning opportunity for most employees, where you sit on that talent scale, is on the job experience. It's taking those different assignments. It's going on these different projects. It's taking that international assignment. It's all these on the job learning experiences that really can make the difference in getting you from A to B. So yeah, it's nuanced.
And how important is it for senior leaders, not just HR, to be actively involved in developing talent?
It's imperative. It's imperative, because you can, as I say, you can have these programs. You can go on a 5-day, 10-day executive leadership program, and that's all great, and you feel great when you're there. But if you come back and you don't implement that, you don't share your learnings with your leader, you don't get the so what from it, nothing's changing. So you, as a manager, relying on HR to develop your employees, it just isn't going to work. Sending them on a program is great for a moment in time, very motivating, very exciting. You come back so energized. But if that can't be translated into business impact, then that's a waste of money. So the managers who make it their top priority, one of their top 3-5 priorities to develop their talent, those are the ones who are really going to make a difference. And as I say, those don't always come from going on a training course or being on a formal program. It's about making sure that you know every single one of your direct reports' career ambitions, and making sure that you're talking to them about what is that 1 or 2 things that you're going to do this year that's going to shift the needle, that's going to close the gap in these capabilities. What is that one project that you're going to take on in addition to your other responsibilities that's going to push you, it's going to challenge you, that's going to make you learn about a corner of the business that you've never touched before? What is the plan? for you to get from this job to the next job you think you want in 3 years. How are we working on that plan to close your gap so that you're ready for that job when it does open? That's the signs of a really good people manager who's really focusing on talent development.
How common is that from your career?
I think that it's HR's job to make sure managers are doing this more and more often. I think it's just really hard, isn't it, to balance
Of course.
that as a manager,
Yeah.
finding the time to do that. Because it's so great me sitting here and saying this is what every single people manager should do. But I appreciate we are really, really busy. And there's more work than ever to be done in an increasingly challenging political, economic environment. Finding the time to dedicate to that, really, really difficult.
There's pressures of the day-to-day business, priorities, everything that's going on internally. It's very hard to have that forward-thinking mentality of future hires when it's not needed right now. So yeah, I get that entirely.
Absolutely.
This is a topic that comes up frequently in recruitment conversations that I have, and some companies do prefer to promote internally whenever possible, as we've discussed. Others regularly hire externally to bring in new perspectives into the business. From a leadership perspective yourself, Claire, how do you think organizations should balance internal promotion with external? I know we've touched on this shortly before, but in terms of where do you think a company then needs to look external as the option?
I think it's, again, not to repeat myself, but it's a bit of a balance. I think constantly bringing in external talent means that you've got a lot of onboarding to do, a lot of ramping up, a lot of making your team available to that person, to educate them, to bring them up to speed, to give them the company knowledge that they need in order to be successful. And you're then accepting that culture of your own team, of knowing that there's no point me aspiring to this job in the future because I know the company's always going to bring someone else from the outside. So what does that do to your existing talent base? Makes the talent experience fairly transactional, I would imagine. So yeah, it's really a choice to constantly bring in external talent. And maybe that works for a period of time. Maybe that really supports an organization going through a huge transformation where what worked in the past and the culture and the knowledge and the experience that we had in the past, maybe that needs to be dramatically shifted for the future. So maybe, that's a tool that can work for a period of time, but it has its impacts.
And I've seen a lot of companies that, in my opinion, rely too heavily on external hiring. And normally they will have a period of extensive external hiring. They'll bring in a lot of great leaders. And I think, wow, you've made a really good hire there. But then integrating 4 or 5 at the same time that are all senior leadership positions across different positions within the business. It's integrating them all simultaneously to work together or within the teams that they have put into. There can also be some resentment from internal members of staff that I wanted that position rather than bringing somebody in externally. So you have to manage all of these different factors. And sometimes I'll see that these businesses have made a lot of external hires and then they have a heavy turnover rate 2 or 3 years down the line because they have failed, unfortunately, to integrate these people into the business. You need to find that balance of the internal option and the external option. So totally agree with what you mentioned there. To close off the discussion, Claire, I'd like to ask you more of a broader question. For CEOs and senior leadership teams in the ingredients industry who are currently maybe struggling to attract and retain talent, what would be the most important thing you would encourage them to rethink?
I think it's about making talent a daily priority. I think it's about making that shift from talent being owned by HR to being owned by the business. That we have HR there as the strategic partner to develop those programs that make sense, to develop those programs that mean that the business will be successful, but then that being owned by the business. And that is the investment in their development. It's the investment in individuals. It's about being creative. It's about saying that, we talked about the job description. Does that job description need to be that? Or can I create a role for this internal person that focuses purely on their capabilities and strengths and build a new role for my talent? How can we think differently about retention? How can we think differently about flexibility? How can we think about finding the best talent in corners of the market that we've never explored before? And all of that, we can have HR as being the steward of that, but the business, the leaders, the managers need to not only buy in, but passionately believe in this and own it. Otherwise, it's not going to make a difference.
Some great advice. Claire, thank you very much for joining me today and sharing your insights. I think the topic of
My pleasure.
Talent and leadership development is clearly becoming one of defining challenges for companies across the industry. So really do appreciate your insights on this.
Thank you so much.
For those listening, if you've enjoyed this episode of The Right Ingredients, please feel free to share it with your colleagues, friends, connections within the industry. It'd be much appreciated. And if there are topics you would like us to cover in future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you in the next episode. Claire, thank you.
Bye.